Out on the streets, shooting. It's NES Works episode 126.
What does God need with a starship?
We begin this episode with a proverbial form of shooting with ICOM and Jaleco's Hoops, the second basketball sim for NES. It's also, in my opinion, the most NES-looking game yet released on NES. Feel free to disagree with me here, but Hoops has a look that will typify the visual aesthetic of the console's library going forward. I mean, a lot of games will look very different than this, but there's something almost iconic about the look of Hoops. Between the tiny character sprites with their crisp black outlines, the color selections, the weirdly smooth yet jerky animation, and the odd mix of flat and extremely detailed background spaces, Hoops just looks NES. No other console had quite the same vibe. Now, I'm not sure the game itself manages to be quite as distinct. In fact, I describe it as a mix of EA's one-on-one and Konami's double dribble. It skews closer to the former than the latter, and not just because it's about street basketball pickup matches. Rather than present you with full teams playing on a full court, Hoops allows you to play 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2 matches, and the action takes place on a half court. In order to change possession of the ball, you need to steal and then dribble over to the midcourt line before doubling back to the hoop. But it definitely borrows without hesitation from double dribble as well, at least in places. The overall look of the game could be described as a more colorful and cartoonish take on the double dribble style. Your players have a more distinct appearance, and the courts are drenched in vibrant colors, or at least as vibrant as the NES color palette could manage. And naturally, when you go in close for the dunk, the game switches to a cinematic view in which oversized player characters move to smash the ball through the hoop, or prevent their rival from scoring. It's less of a classic basketball simulation than double dribble, but that works in its favor. And developer ICOM leaned into the individually driven nature of street ball. Hoops allows you to build your team from, or play solo as one of, 8 different characters. Each player doesn't simply look distinct, they play differently from their potential competitors as well. The teen athletes here consist of both boys and girls, of a mix of races, and each player has his or her own strengths and weaknesses. They also don't have real names, going by goofy aliases like Jammer, Barbie, Zap, and Mr. Doc. These monikers don't really give you a sense of their respective abilities, whereas their physical appearance usually does. The taller players like Mr. Doc and Prettyface tend to fare best on the court, while shorter players like Legs and Jammer excel at defense but can struggle to shoot past their lanky rivals. And I do mean rivals. Every character has an opposite number that the computer will select for one-on-one or 1 versus 1 matches against the CPU. Not unlike in Street Fighter II, which of course didn't exist at this point in history, the competitors in Hoops pair off against another character whose skills neatly counter their own. For example, Bomber is a great shooter from a distance, so the computer always pits him against Zap or Legs, who excel at defense and steals respectively. This character balancing goes a long way toward giving Hoops a degree of depth lacking in double dribble, where every player and team have identical stats and skills, or one-on-one, which wouldn't make it to NES for another couple of months. Of course, players wanting a full-scale competition between entire teams will still prefer double dribble, but Hoops' style of play feels more of the moment in 1989 and pushes the sports genre forward a step on NES. Outside of Punch-Out, which isn't precisely an authentic take on its respective sport, the closest thing we've seen to athlete variances on the console so far has come via the 3-player dynamic of ice hockey. In theory, individual athletes possess distinct stats and traits in the various baseball games we've encountered, and in Tecmo Bowl, but outside of Bo Jackson's bizarre dominance in Tecmo Bowl, I never really saw it. Here though, you can really tell the difference between players. And thanks to some excellent visual design, which was kind of ICOM's thing, Amagon notwithstanding, you can easily distinguish each player on the court at a glance. Not only do you never need to worry about losing track of your team members, you can quickly get a sense of what sort of player you're up against and respond appropriately. While Hoops looks good and features strong design principles, it doesn't quite manage to become an all-timer due to its slightly annoying gameplay. Perhaps inevitably for a game about street matches, Hoops involves characters getting up in each other's faces and constantly swiping the ball, especially in one-on-one play. It's all well and good in theory to have characters who specialize in short-range shooting and layups. Those skills don't do a lot of good if you can't actually approach the basket without your rival inevitably snatching the ball away. Playing Hoops largely boils down to pressing up against whichever character currently has possession and smashing the action button until the computer decides to let you steal. Then tossing the ball toward the basket as quickly as possible before that player steals it back. The computer will mix things up by penalizing one player or another for being too aggressive, but this appears to happen more or less at random. You can hammer the button and smash up against an opponent, and they'll end up being the one penalized. Which either means the CPU is a terrible referee, or else the other player was somehow being even more violent than you. Aside from this one admittedly significant failing, Hoops does a pretty solid job of, well, being basketball. Albeit a limited version of basketball. You have plenty of options for play. Besides the option to play one-on-one or two-on-two pickup games, you can choose among different courts and the score you'll play to. And every match begins with a quick competition to sink a basket that determines who takes possession of the ball first. Not only is this a nice touch, it also gives you a preview of the shooting system, which involves an arrow rapidly swirling around the hoop. You want to shoot when the arrow is as close to the center of the basket as possible. The game even presents you with a sort of career mode. When you win a 2-on-2 match, you'll receive a password which you can use to continue the game with your team's win on the record. Defeat all of the different rival pairings, which admittedly just takes a few matches, and you'll be treated to an ending sequence that details your players' post-challenge lives in brief. Some players live out their dreams of becoming pro ballers, while others pursue different passions. And then you have Barbie, who marries her college coach, which strikes me as somewhat inappropriate. She's a better player than he is, so I guess it makes this abuse of power dynamics okay? Anyway, Hoops shipped in Japan as part of Jaleco's Moero series, like Bases Loaded and Racket Attack. So the fact that it looks great and plays better than average shouldn't be surprising. It doesn't strike me as having gone down in history as it being an iconic title like Double Dribble, or as significant as One-on-One, probably because it showed up right on the cusp of rowdier basketball games like NBA Jam and Arch Rivals, the latter of which debuted in arcades mere weeks before Hoops hit stores. Ain't that always the way? Wow, another Bandai game. That's 5 so far in 1989, which I believe is their quota, so that means things are looking up already. But first we have to make it through shooting range. I mean, it's fine. I've played worse light gun games than this, but it's so slight and pointless. Shooting range feels for all the world like an early Master System light gun title. Those barely held up back in 1986. Here in 1989, in the wake of something like Operation Wolf, I can't really find much to defend about something so vapid. About all that shooting range has going for it is the fact that up to 4 people can play. Now, don't mistake that for meaning that it supports 4 people shooting simultaneously at the screen. For starters, we're still about a year away from the arrival of the NES's 4-player multi-tap. But also, I'm not sure that the NES Zapper could even support multiple guns due to the way that it registers and tracks shots. So this is a 4-player game where 3 people sit around doing jack squat at all times. That's always a recipe for a great time, but doubly so when the game in question is as boring as shooting range. Now, developer Tosei put together a reasonably attractive work here. It feels like devs have really gotten a handle on the console's advanced memory management chips and have poured those technical resources into clean, appealing graphics. But what's the point when those graphics exist in a game like this? The primary mode of shooting range takes place across 3 differently themed stages: the Wild West, a haunted house, and the moon. But it fails to do much of anything interesting with these settings. With the one exception, all you need to do here is shoot enough stuff to hit a score objective. You have a life meter at the bottom of the screen, but unlike in Gacha or Operation Wolf, nothing shoots back at you. The only real threat to your health is your own incompetence, since hitting certain bonus objects will deduct energy from your total. The entire game gives the impression that Bandai decided it needed to release a light gun game for the American market to take advantage of the American enthusiasm for the format, and handed that assignment to Tosei without giving it any real thought. Tosei then spent 5 minutes researching popular themes among Americans, by which I mean browsing the import section at the video shop. So we end up with a game that features 3 America-flavored genres: a Western, a horror movie, and sci-fi. And then a series of targets wanders indifferently across the screen for you to shoot at. Or rather, they wander indifferently across the screen carrying targets for you to shoot at. It's 1989, and we begin to see America's short-lived sensitivity to gun violence finally taking form. From what I can determine, Shooting Range debuted around the same time that the Zapper got its neon orange facelift to make it look less like a real weapon as much as it ever did, and Shooting Range seems like the perfect game to go along with that kinder, more socially conscious fake weapon. Rather than gunning down humans and creatures, you instead take aim at the targets those characters carry, which resemble peppermint candies? Also, at no point do enemies ever target you. Shooting Range absolutely gives the impression of a game that was hastily reworked at the last minute to tone down its evident violence. So you end up with oddities, like cowboys who hunker down and appear to take aim at you and just don't shoot. It's probably just as well thematically, since without the peppermint targets, you'd be blasting random Native Americans who appear to be simply going about their business, which is not a great image. But this design really muddies the gameplay, which feels bland and purposeless. Shooting Range can be a little difficult given that you have to reach a certain score in order to advance to the next stage, and enemies spawn and sometimes don't spawn at random. So there is a crapshoot element to success. But it feels so bland and insipid. A low-tension shooting game in which you use the D-pad to shift your focus and gun down candies. It compares Shooting Range to a Master System light gun title, but truth be told, those always had a bit of spice to them. Shooting Range is more like a bowl of runny oatmeal. It's there, and you can eat it, but why would you want to? Oops actually enjoyed a 2-page spread in Nintendo Power, a rarity among the recent crop of games seen on NES Works. Which isn't to say that recent games have all been bad, just that the magazine was pretty sparing with coverage, as seen with Shooting Range, which got the minimum effort, and deservedly so. Next time on NES, next time on NES Works, you're going to want to pull up a chair for this one. Get your weapons ready.